The station was massive. Epsilon Prime floated in the dark space between star systems, a place where hundreds of alien species came together to talk instead of fight. It had been built over 300 years ago, and every species in the galaxy knew about it. The station had long metal corridors that stretched for miles, meeting rooms with ceilings so high you could not see the top, and windows that showed the emptiness of space outside. Lieutenant Kyle Martinez walked through one of those corridors, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic security force, and his eyes watched everything around him. Kyle was 32 years old with short black hair and a face that showed no emotion. Before this job, he had been in special forces on Earth. He knew how to fight, but his job here was to keep people safe, not to start trouble. Next to him walked Ambassador Lisa Chen, the leader of the human diplomatic team. She was shorter than Kyle, with long dark hair tied back in a neat style. She carried a data pad and was reading reports about today's meeting. Lisa had been a diplomat for 15 years, and she was good at her job. She knew how to talk to aliens, how to make them understand human ideas without making them angry. Behind them came 3 more security officers and 2 other diplomats. They were all heading to the main council chamber for an important meeting. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 30 years, which was not a long time. Most of the alien species had been traveling through space for thousands of years. They looked at humans like children who were still learning how things worked. The meeting room was huge. The ceiling was so high that Kyle could barely see it, and the walls curved in a circle around rows of seats. Each species had their own section, with special chairs or platforms made for their different bodies. The Krellians sat on one side of the room. They were big creatures standing almost 8 feet tall with thick gray skin that looked like armor. They had 4 arms and eyes that glowed red in the dim light. Kyle did not like the Krellians. They were warriors, always talking about battles and strength. They thought humans were weak because Earth had not fought in any major space wars yet. The Krellians made it clear that they did not respect humans. The meeting started with the usual boring speeches. Different ambassadors stood up and talked about trade agreements and border disputes. Kyle stood against the wall near Ambassador Chen, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked relaxed, but his eyes never stopped moving. He watched the exits, counted the guards from other species, and made note of anything unusual. Halfway through the meeting, one of the Krellian representatives stood up. His name was Gorath, and he was a military commander. He was bigger than the other Krellians, with scars across his face that showed he had been in many battles. Gorath pointed one of his 4 arms at the human section. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. The translator device in Kyle's ear turned the alien sounds into English words. The humans sit here and make demands, but what have they done? They have fought no wars. They have conquered no enemies. They are weak and soft, and yet they expect to be treated as equals. Kyle felt his jaw tighten, but he did not move. Ambassador Chen stood up slowly, her face calm. She had dealt with insults before. Commander Gorath, humanity seeks peace, not conflict. We believe that strength comes from cooperation, not conquest. We hope to learn from the other species here and contribute our own knowledge and skills. Gorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. Peace is what the weak call their fear. You have no military victories because you are afraid to fight. The Krellian Empire has crushed 100 species who thought peace would save them. Other species in the room shifted uncomfortably. The tension was growing, but this was how diplomatic meetings worked. Everyone said their peace insults were exchanged, and then they moved on to voting or making agreements. Kyle knew this. He had seen it dozens of times before. Ambassador Chen smiled slightly. Perhaps one day the Krellian Empire will understand that there are different kinds of strength. For now, we will continue to work toward peace. She sat down and the meeting continued. Kyle relaxed a little. The ambassador had handled it well, as always. After the meeting ended, there was a social gathering in one of the station's large halls. This was where the real work happened. Diplomats walked around with drinks, talking quietly and making deals away from the formal meetings. The room was filled with strange shapes and colors as dozens of different species mixed together. Kyle stood near a wall, watching Ambassador Chen as she talked with a group of insect-like aliens called the Chixari. His partner, Captain Nina Roberts, stood a few feet away. Nina was 40 years old with gray streaks in her brown hair. She had been in the military for 20 years and had seen combat on 3 different planets before joining the diplomatic service. Nina spoke quietly into her comm device, checking in with the other security team members positioned around the room. Everything seemed normal. A tall, thin alien approached Kyle. It had green scales and a long tail that dragged on the floor behind it. Its eyes were yellow with vertical pupils like a snake. The translator on Kyle's collar activated. "You are the human security officer, yes? My name is Zixthar. I am an observer for the council." Kyle nodded. "Lieutenant Kyle Martinez. What can I do for you, observer?" Zixthar tilted his head in a way that seemed curious. "I study different species and how they behave. Humans are fascinating. You show great calm when insulted, but I sense something underneath. Tell me, do humans ever lose their temper?" Kyle thought about how to answer. "Of course we do. But we learn to control it. In situations like this, getting angry does not help." "Interesting. And if the situation were different? If there was actual danger instead of just words?" "Then we would handle it," Kyle said simply. Zixthar seemed like he wanted to ask more questions, but then Nina's voice came sharp through Kyle's earpiece. "Martinez, we have a problem." The ambassadors group. "They are heading toward the east exit, but that was not part of the schedule." Kyle's eyes snapped to where Ambassador Chen had been standing. She was gone. So were the 2 junior diplomats who had been with her. His hand moved to the weapon hidden under his jacket, but he did not draw it yet. "Nina, check the security feeds. Find them now, already on it. The cameras near the east exit are down. Someone cut them." Kyle started moving, his relaxed posture changing instantly to something focused. Other security team members were already heading toward the exits, moving quickly but not running. They did not want to cause panic. Within 5 minutes they knew what had happened. Ambassador Chen and 2 other diplomats, Danny Brooks and Helen Kim, were gone. Security footage from outside the main hall showed them being surrounded by a group of armed Krellians and forced into a small transport ship. The ship had already left the station. Nina stood in the security office, watching the footage replay on the screens. Her face was hard. This was not random. This was planned. Kyle stood beside her, his arms crossed. The Krellians knew exactly when the cameras would be down and which route to take. Someone on the station helped them. Dr. Peter Grant, the human cultural advisor, rushed into the room. He was a thin man with glasses and messy hair. "What happened? Where is the ambassador?" "Taken," Nina said flatly. "Krellian radicals, looks like. They grabbed her and 2 others about 10 minutes ago." Peter's face went pale. "Oh no, do we know where they went?" Kyle pulled up a star map on one of the screens. The ship headed toward the Terran asteroid belt. "There are old mining facilities out there. Abandoned, mostly. Good place to hide hostages. We need to go after them," Peter said. Nina shook her head. "Not yet. There are protocols. The Council has to authorize any military action. We cannot just start a firefight in neutral space." Kyle said nothing, but his hands were clenched into fists. Within an hour, the Council convened an emergency session. The main chamber filled with representatives from every major species. The Krellian government claimed they had nothing to do with the kidnapping, saying it was the work of radicals who did not represent their empire. They offered sympathy but no real help. The council chairman, a floating jellyfish-like creature called a luminar, spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "This situation is deeply troubling. However, we must handle it carefully. Violence breeds more violence. We will send negotiators to speak with the kidnappers and find a peaceful resolution." Nina stood up in the human section. "With respect, Chairman, these are our people. We should be allowed to mount a rescue operation." The Luminar's body pulsed with soft blue light. "Captain Roberts, we understand your concern, but if we allow military action every time there is a hostage situation, we will have chaos. The Council's negotiators are the best in the galaxy. We have resolved hundreds of situations like this without violence." Kyle watched from where he stood against the wall. His face showed nothing, but inside he was calculating. He was already planning a rescue mission in his head, working out the details of how they would breach the mining facility, where the hostages would likely be held, what weapons they would need. But Nina was right. They had to follow the rules, at least for now. If they went rogue, humanity would lose all credibility with the Council. So they waited. Observer Zixthar approached Kyle after the session ended. The Council negotiators were considered the best in the galaxy. They had ended wars, resolved territorial disputes, and saved countless lives through careful diplomacy. 3 of them sat in a communication room on Epsilon Prime, working on the hostage situation. One was a tall, blue-skinned alien called a Viridian, known for their patience and wisdom. Another was a round, furry creature from the Paxan species, famous for finding creative solutions. The third was a crystalline being that communicated through light patterns. They had been talking to the Krellian kidnappers for 12 hours now. The conversations went in circles. The Krellians demanded humiliation. The negotiators offered alternatives. Nothing was working. In another part of the station, Kyle Martinez sat in the human quarters cleaning his weapon. It was a ritual that calmed him. He took the gun apart piece by piece, cleaned each part carefully, and put it back together. His movements were smooth and automatic, done 1,000 times before. Captain Nina Roberts entered the room. The negotiations are not going well. The Krellians are not budging. Kyle did not look up from his work. How long has it been? 28 hours since they were taken. 12 hours of active negotiation. Kyle finished reassembling the weapon and set it down. Ambassador Chen is strong. She can hold on. But the others might not be as experienced. Danny Brooks is young, Nina said quietly. 26 years old. This is his first assignment off Earth. Helen Kim has more experience, but she has a medical condition. She needs medication every day. Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. Does the council know about Helen's medication? Yes, they mentioned it to the kidnappers. The Krellians said they would consider it if we agreed to their demands first. Kyle stood up and walked to the window. Outside, space looked empty and cold. So they are using her medical needs as leverage. Nina nodded. The council is still optimistic. They think they can break through eventually. They always do, they say. Eventually might be too late. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Kyle turned back to face her. How many people can we take on a rescue mission without it looking like an invasion force? 8, maybe 10. Any more and the council will stop us before we leave the docking bay. Kyle nodded. That is enough. We have 7 on the security team. Add Dr. Grant and myself, that is 9. We can do it with 9, Dr. Grant? Nina raised an eyebrow. He is not a soldier. No, but we might need someone who understands alien psychology. And he volunteered. Nina looked surprised. He did about an hour ago. Said he feels responsible because he should have noticed something was wrong during the social gathering. I told him to be ready in case we got approval. Nina smiled slightly. You were already planning this. Always plan for every possibility, Captain. That is what you taught me. The next message from the kidnappers came at hour 32. It was another video. This time, Ambassador Chen looked worse. Her face had more bruises and one of her eyes was swollen shut. But she still held her head up, still looked at the camera with defiance. Behind her, Danny Brooks sat slumped against a wall. He looked scared and hurt. Helen Kim was shaking, clearly in pain without her medication. The Krellian spokesman appeared in the video. His voice was harsh. You have 12 more hours to accept our demands. If you do not, we will begin killing the hostages. We will start with the young one to show you we are serious. The video ended. The council called another emergency session. The Viridian negotiator stood before the assembly. We believe we are making progress. The kidnappers are showing signs of flexibility. They have extended the deadline, which means they are willing to continue talking. Nina stood up in the human section. With respect, that is not progress. That is them toying with us. They are hurting our people while you talk. The council chairman, the Luminar, pulsed with soft colors. Captain Roberts, we understand your frustration, but violence is not the answer. We must have faith in the process. How much faith do we need when one of our people requires medication she is not getting? Nina's voice was controlled but firm. How much faith when they are threatening to execute a 26-year-old diplomat who did nothing wrong? The chamber fell silent. Other species shifted uncomfortably. They could see the humans were reaching a breaking point. But they did not understand why humans seemed so emotional about this. Hostage situations happened all the time in the galaxy. Most ended peacefully with negotiation. Observer Zixthar watched Kyle Martinez from across the chamber. The human security officer had not said a word during the entire session. He just stood there against the wall perfectly still. But Zixthar noticed his eyes. They were different now. Cold, calculating, like a predator watching prey. The Luminar spoke again. We will give the negotiators 6 more hours. If there is no progress by then, we will reconsider our options. 6 hours, Nina repeated. And if they kill someone in those 6 hours? The Luminar's light dimmed slightly. Let us hope it does not come to that. The session ended. Kyle and Nina walked back to the human quarters in silence. Other security team members were waiting there. They all looked tense, ready for action, but forced to wait. Dr. Grant sat in a corner studying his datapad. He looked up when they entered. I have been researching Krellian psychology. They respect strength and direct action. All of their cultural stories are about warriors who face their enemies head-on. They see negotiation as weakness. So the more we talk, the less they respect us, Kyle said. Exactly. In their minds, we have already proven we are weak by not attacking immediately. They think humans will do anything to avoid violence. One of the security officers, a woman named Kate Morrison, spoke up. So they do not actually expect us to fight back? No, Dr. Grant said. They think this will end with humans being humiliated and them getting everything they want. They see it as a game they have already won. Kyle looked at Nina. We need to change their minds about that. Hour 36 came and went. The negotiators were still talking to the kidnappers, but nothing changed. Hour 40 came, then 42. At hour 44, everything changed. The new video message appeared on screens throughout the station. The entire council saw it. Kyle and his team saw it. Thousands of aliens from hundreds of species saw it. The video showed Danny Brooks. The young diplomat was on his knees, his hands tied behind his back. He was crying, begging. The Krellian spokesman stood behind him, holding a large weapon. You had your time, the Krellian said. You chose to talk instead of act. Now you will see what your weakness costs. Danny looked at the camera. Mom, Dad, I am sorry. I love you, the weapon fired. The video went dark for a moment, then showed the Krellians pushing Danny's body out of an airlock. It floated away into space, slowly tumbling in the darkness. The Krellian spokesman appeared again. You have 12 hours to accept all demands or the woman with the medical condition dies next. The video ended. The council chamber erupted in shock and outrage. Species that had been preaching patience were now calling for action. The Luminar's light turned dark red, a sign of anger. Even the peaceful negotiators looked disturbed, but none of them noticed what was happening in the human section. Captain Nina Roberts stood perfectly still. Her face, which had shown concern and frustration for the past 2 days, was now completely blank, empty, like someone had switched off all emotion. Kyle Martinez stopped moving. He had been shifting his weight, checking his equipment, showing small signs of tension. Now he stood like a statue. His eyes were still open, still watching, but something behind them had changed. The other human security officers showed the same change. It happened in seconds, like a switch being flipped. One moment they were tense soldiers waiting for orders. The next moment they were something else, something colder. Dr. Grant, who had been explaining human psychology to aliens just hours before, fell silent. He stared at the screen where Danny's body had been shown, and his face went white. Observer Zixthar felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not of immediate danger, but of something he could not name. The humans had changed in a way he could not describe. Their body language was different. Their faces were different. Even the way they breathed seemed different. The Luminar was speaking, saying something about how this changed everything, how they would need to reconsider their approach. But Nina was not listening. She turned to Kyle and spoke one word. Go. Kyle nodded once. He did not ask for permission from the council. He did not wait for authorization. He simply turned and walked out of the chamber. The rest of the security team followed him without a word. Several alien security officers tried to stop them, asking where they were going. Kyle walked past them without responding. When one officer physically stepped in front of him, Kyle's eyes met his. The alien stepped aside immediately, something in that gaze making him move on instinct. Observer Zixthar followed at a distance, his curiosity overcoming his unease. He watched the humans move through the station corridors with a new sense of purpose. They were not running. They were not shouting. They just walked with absolute certainty, like machines programmed for a specific task. In the docking bay, the humans boarded a fast assault shuttle. They moved with mechanical efficiency, checking equipment and loading weapons. No one spoke except to give brief, necessary information. Target coordinates, flight time, expected resistance. The shuttle was dark inside except for the glow of instrument panels. The journey to the asteroid belt would take 3 hours. Observer Zixthar sat near the back, watching the humans prepare. They worked in complete silence. Kyle Martinez sat at a small table, studying the facility blueprints on a datapad. His finger traced paths through corridors, marking entry points and defensive positions. He did this over and over, memorizing every detail. The other team members checked their weapons with ritualistic precision. Kate Morrison, the weapons specialist, took apart her rifle and inspected each piece before putting it back together. She did this 3 times. Each time she worked faster until her hands moved in a blur. Another officer, a man named Greg Sullivan, was testing night vision equipment. He put the goggles on, looked around the cabin, then took them off and adjusted something. He repeated this process at least 15 times, making tiny adjustments each time. Dr. Grant sat near Zixthar, looking nervous. He was the only human who seemed uncomfortable. The others moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. Dr. Grant fidgeted with his equipment belt, checking and rechecking the medical supplies he carried. Zixthar tried to engage Kyle in conversation. "Lieutenant Martinez, may I ask you something?" Kyle did not look up from the blueprints. "What? You seem very calm. Are you not angry about what happened to your colleague?" Kyle was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Anger is a distraction. It makes you sloppy. Right now, I need to be precise." "But you cared about him?" "Danny Brooks?" "Yes, he was a good kid, smart, wanted to make a difference. His parents were proud of him, and now he is dead, and the people who killed him are waiting in that facility." Kyle finally looked up, his eyes meeting Zixthar's. Soon they will understand that they made a mistake. The reptilian alien felt a chill run down his spine. There was no heat in Kyle's voice, no rage, just cold certainty. It was more frightening than any threat. "Tell me about human hunting traditions," Zixthar said, trying to understand. "I have read that your species evolved as hunters. Is this related to that?" Kyle set down the datapad. "Humans are persistence predators, observer. That means we do not have the speed of a cheetah or the strength of a bear. We have something else. We can keep going. We can track prey for hours, for days if necessary. We follow until they are too tired to run anymore. Then we finish the job. But this is not hunting animals. This is combat against armed enemies. The principle is the same. You study the target. You learn their patterns. You find their weaknesses. Then you exploit them." Kyle picked up the datapad again. "The Krellians think they are safe in that facility. They think they have hostages as shields. They think we will negotiate or retreat. They are wrong on all counts. How can you be so certain? Because they crossed a line they did not know existed. In human culture there are rules. Unwritten, but everyone understands them. You do not kill prisoners. You do not execute someone who has surrendered. You do not harm people who are helpless. The Krellians broke those rules. Now there are no rules protecting them." Zixthar thought about this. "So this is about justice?" "No," Kyle said quietly. "This is about consequence. They wanted to teach humans a lesson about weakness. Instead, they are about to learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." The conversation ended. Kyle went back to studying the blueprints. Zixthar sat in silence, recording his observations. After 2 hours, Kate Morrison spoke up. She was the first person to break the silence in over an hour. "Lieutenant, what is the estimated enemy count?" Kyle did not need to check his notes. Station sensors counted 31 Krellians boarding the transport ship. Assuming they all went to the facility, that is our number. Heavily armed, military training. They will have set up defensive positions around the hostage location. Greg Sullivan looked up from his equipment. 31 against 8. Those are not good odds. Kate smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed a challenge. 31 targets, 8 operators. Sounds about right. The other team members nodded in agreement. Zixthar was confused. How could they be confident about such terrible odds? His species would consider this a suicide mission. Kyle pulled up a three-dimensional map of the facility. The building floated in the air above his data pad, showing every corridor and room. We will enter here, here, and here. He pointed to 3 different airlocks. 3 teams of 2 plus Dr. Grant and Observer Zixthar with me. We move silently until we cannot. The hostages are being held in this central chamber. We need to clear the outer areas before we breach that room. What if they hear us coming? Dr. Grant asked nervously. What if they execute the hostages before we can reach them? They will not hear us, Kyle said with certainty. We will be quieter than shadows. The shuttle pilot, a woman named Sarah Quinn, called back from the cockpit, approaching the asteroid belt. Target facility in sight. Multiple heat signatures inside. Looks like they are spread throughout the building. Good, Kyle said. That makes it easier. We can pick them off one by one. The team stood up and began final preparations. They helped each other check equipment, making sure every strap was tight, every weapon was loaded, every communication device was working. They moved efficiently, no wasted motion. Zixthar noticed something strange. The humans were not giving each other encouragement or trying to boost morale. They did not shake hands or make promises to watch each other's backs. They just worked, silent and focused. It was like watching machines prepare for a task. The shuttle matched velocity with the asteroid and approached the facility. It was an old mining station, built into the rock of the asteroid itself. Metal corridors and chambers had been carved out decades ago when this place was profitable. Now it was abandoned, perfect for hiding hostages. Sarah kept the shuttle dark and quiet, using minimal thrusters to avoid detection. She positioned the craft near one of the maintenance airlocks on the far side of the facility. No alarms sounded. The Krellians did not know they were here yet. Kyle looked at his team. Remember, silence until we cannot be silent anymore. No shots unless necessary. Stick to the plan. Extract the hostages. The rest is secondary. Kate raised her hand slightly. Question: what about prisoners? Kyle's expression did not change. If someone surrenders and drops their weapon, we restrain them. Otherwise, neutralize all threats. No hesitation, no second chances. The team nodded. Zixthar felt sick. These humans, we're talking about killing dozens of beings with the same tone they might use to discuss cleaning a room. He wanted to protest, to say something about mercy or civilized behavior. But he remembered agreeing to stay out of the way. The shuttle docked with the airlock so gently that there was barely a sound. The team split into 3 groups. Kate Morrison and Greg Sullivan were Team 1. 2 other officers, Tom Baker and Rachel Sanders, were Team 2. Kyle, Dr. Grant, and Zixthar were Team 3. The last 2 officers, Jack Chen and Maria Lopez, would provide backup and control the shuttle. Each team moved to their designated entry point. They synchronized their watches. They would enter simultaneously 3 minutes from now. That gave them time to position themselves at the different airlocks around the facility. Kyle checked his weapon one last time. It was equipped with a suppressor, designed to make as little noise as possible. He activated his night vision goggles and secured them on his head. The goggles would let him see in the dark corridors of the facility. Dr. Grant looked pale. He carried only a small pistol and medical supplies. He was not here to fight. He was here to treat the hostages once they were freed. The countdown reached 0. All 3 teams breached their airlock simultaneously. The metal doors opened with soft hisses. The humans slipped inside like ghosts. The interior of the facility was dark and cold. Emergency lighting provided only dim illumination every 20 feet or so. The humans switched on their night vision, and suddenly they could see everything in shades of green. Zixthar struggled to see in the darkness, even with his naturally good night vision. But the humans moved confidently, as if they could sense the walls and obstacles before them. Kyle led his group down a maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for them to move single file. Their footsteps made almost no sound. Kyle seemed to know exactly where to place his feet to avoid making noise. They reached A junction where the tunnel opened into a larger corridor. Kyle held up his fist, the signal to stop. He peered around the corner carefully. 2 Krellian guards stood about 40 feet away, talking to each other in their harsh language. They looked bored, not expecting any trouble. Kyle pulled back and used hand signals to communicate with his team. 2 targets, 40 feet, unaware. He made a motion indicating he and Dr. Grant would provide cover while he moved forward alone. Zixthar watched in fascination as Kyle moved into the corridor. The human stayed close to the wall, using the shadows. He moved slowly, taking several seconds for each step. His breathing was controlled, completely silent. The Krellians did not notice him. They were too busy with their conversation. Kyle got within 10 feet of them before one of the guards finally sensed something was wrong. He started to turn. Kyle moved faster than Zixthar thought possible. His weapon came up and fired twice. Soft sounds like someone coughing. Both Krellians. The world inside the chamber became chaos. The flash grenade had done its job. The Krellians inside were blind and deaf for those critical first seconds. But they were warriors trained for combat. They recovered quickly. The humans poured through the door in perfect coordination. 3 entered from the main entrance. 2 more came through a side access panel that Kate had blown open. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, finding positions that gave them the best firing angles. The chamber was large, maybe 50 feet across. Crates and equipment were scattered throughout, creating cover. Ambassador Chen was tied to a chair in one corner. Helen Kim lay on the floor near her, barely conscious. 4 Krellian guards were positioned around the room, and all of them were armed with heavy weapons. One Krellian raised his weapon toward Ambassador Chen, shouting something in his language. He was going to execute her before the humans could reach him. Kyle's weapon barked 3 times. The Krellian's head snapped back and he fell. Kyle was already moving to the next target before the first body hit the ground. The chamber filled with the sound of weapons fire, but it was not random chaos. The humans fired with precise control, each shot aimed at a specific target. They communicated through hand signals and brief radio calls, directing each other to threats. A Krellian tried to use Helen Kim as a shield, grabbing her by the hair and pulling her up. Greg Sullivan's shot took him through the eye before he could hurt her. Helen dropped to the floor again, and Rachel Sanders was there instantly, dragging her to safety behind a crate. Another Krellian threw a grenade. The human saw it coming and dove for cover. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, but no one was hurt. Before the dust cleared, Tom Baker was up and firing, eliminating the Krellian who had thrown it. The entire battle lasted 17 seconds. When it ended, all 4 Krellian guards were dead. The 2 hostages were safe. None of the humans had been injured. Kyle moved immediately to Ambassador Chen. He cut her restraints with a knife, speaking calmly. "Ambassador, can you walk?" Lisa Chen's face was badly bruised, and she had cuts on her arms and face. But her eyes were clear and focused. "Yes, I can walk." She looked at Kyle with something like awe. "You came?" "Of course we came," Kyle said. He helped her stand, then moved to secure the room while Dr. Grant rushed to check on Helen Kim. Dr. Grant knelt beside Helen, checking her pulse and breathing. "She is alive but in bad shape. She needs her medication immediately, and she has been beaten. Possible internal injuries. Can she be moved?" Kyle asked. "Yes, but carefully. We need to get her to the shuttle." Kate Morrison was already setting up a defensive position at the door. Greg Sullivan checked the bodies to make sure they were all dead. It was cold, methodical work. He did it without emotion. Kyle spoke into his radio. "All teams report status." The responses came quickly. Team 1 secure. 3 enemy down. Team 2 secure. 5 enemy down. No friendly casualties. Good. Prepare for extraction. We are bringing out both hostages. Tom, Rachel, you are carrying Helen Kim. Kate, Greg, you take point. I will escort Ambassador Chen. Everyone else provide rear security. The team acknowledged and began moving. Tom and Rachel made a stretcher from their jackets and carefully lifted Helen onto it. Ambassador Chen walked on her own, though she limped slightly. Kyle stayed close to her, his weapon ready. Observer Zixthar had watched the entire assault from the corridor outside. He was shaking, not from fear of the humans, but from what he had witnessed. The precision, the cold efficiency, the complete absence of hesitation. The humans had entered that room knowing they might die, but they had not shown fear. They had just done their job. The journey back through the facility was different from the approach. Now there was no need for silence. The team moved quickly, weapons up, checking corners. They passed the bodies of the Krellians they had eliminated during the infiltration. 31 enemies had been inside this facility when they arrived. Now all 31 were dead. They reached the airlock where the shuttle waited. Sarah Quinn had kept the engines running, ready for a quick departure. Jack Chen and Maria Lopez helped load the hostages aboard. Once everyone was inside, Sarah closed the airlock and detached from the facility. The shuttle accelerated away from the asteroid, heading back toward Epsilon Prime. Dr. Grant immediately began treating Helen Kim. He had medication with him and started an IV line to get fluids into her system. She was unconscious but stable. Ambassador Chen refused treatment at first, saying Helen needed it more. But Dr. Grant insisted on at least cleaning and bandaging her wounds. Kyle sat down near the back of the shuttle and began cleaning his weapon. The ritual again. Take it apart. Clean each piece. Put it back together. His hands moved automatically while his mind processed what had happened. Ambassador Chen made her way back to sit near him. She moved carefully, pain evident in her face. Lieutenant Martinez, I need to thank you. Kyle did not look up from his work. Just doing my job, Ambassador? No, she shook her head. It was more than that. You and your team risked your lives. The council said to wait, to let the negotiators work. But you came anyway. The negotiations were not working. Kyle's voice was still flat, emotionless. And they killed Danny. At that point, talking was over. Ambassador Chen was quiet for a moment. I watched you during the rescue. You and your team. It was like you became different people. Like machines. No fear, no anger. Just action, fear, and anger do not help in that situation, Kyle said. He finally looked up at her. Ambassador, may I ask you something? Of course, when they killed Danny, did they do it to scare you? To make you more compliant? Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. Yes, they said it was a lesson. That humans needed to learn respect. They thought it would break our spirit and did it? She smiled slightly despite her injuries. No. After they did that, I knew you would come. I knew the negotiations meant nothing anymore. The Krellians thought they were teaching us a lesson, but they taught themselves one instead. They learned what humans are capable of when you cross certain lines. Kyle went back to cleaning his weapon. That is a good way to put it. Observer Zixthar approached them carefully. Lieutenant Martinez, Ambassador Chen. May I ask you both some questions? For my report to the council? Ambassador Chen nodded. Of course, Observer Zixthar pulled out a recording device. I witnessed something today that I do not fully understand. I have seen combat before. I have seen soldiers fight. But this was different. You and your team, Lieutenant, you changed somehow. It was not just training or skill. Something else happened. Something psychological. Kyle thought about how to explain it. Humans have different modes of behavior, Observer. In normal situations, we are social, diplomatic, friendly. We laugh and joke and build relationships. But when certain circumstances occur, especially when people we are supposed to protect are threatened or harmed, we can shift into a different state. In that state, everything else becomes secondary to the mission. Emotions get set aside because they interfere with effectiveness. Is it a conscious choice? Can you control when it happens? Kyle paused. Training helps. In the military, we learn to enter and exit this state deliberately. But there are also triggers, things that activate it automatically. The execution of a helpless prisoner is one of those triggers. It is hardwired into human psychology. When we see that kind of violation, something switches inside us. Zixthar looked at Ambassador Chen. Did you notice this change in the lieutenant and his team? She nodded. I have known Lieutenant Martinez for 2 years. He has always been professional and pleasant, serious about his job but also kind. He would help people carry heavy boxes, make jokes to lighten the mood. A good man. She paused. But during the rescue I saw someone different. Not bad or cruel, just focused in a way that was almost frightening. He saved my life, but he did it with the same expression you might use to file paperwork. No emotion at all. It is not that we do not care, Kyle said quietly. It is that caring too much in that moment makes you less effective. The best way to save hostages is to remove all distractions and focus entirely on the objective. Later there will be time for emotions. During the mission there is only the mission. Zixthar recorded all of this carefully. But what triggered this change specifically? Was it the execution of Danny Brooks? Kyle nodded. Yes, up until that point this was a hostage situation. Dangerous but manageable through negotiation potentially. But when they killed Danny, they crossed a line. They showed they were willing to murder helpless people. At that point they lost any moral protection. They became targets, not enemies to negotiate with. But why that specific act? Many species would be angry about a killing, but they would still seek diplomatic solutions. Why did humans respond with immediate violence? Kyle set down his weapon and looked at the reptilian alien. Because in human culture, there are rules about how conflicts should be conducted. You do not harm prisoners. You do not torture captives. You do not execute someone who has surrendered or is helpless. These rules are not just practical, they are moral. When someone breaks those rules, they are saying they do not recognize any limits. And if they do not recognize limits, then we do not need to show them any either. So it is about justice? Zixthar asked. Ambassador Chen spoke up. Not justice, protection, the Krellians proved. The shuttle docked at Epsilon Prime 6 hours after leaving the mining facility. News of the rescue had already spread throughout the station. Thousands of aliens crowded the observation windows, watching as the human team emerged. Medical teams rushed forward to take Ambassador Chen and Helen Kim to the medical bay. Both women were stable, but they needed proper treatment. Dr. Grant went with them. Still in his role as medical support, Kyle and his security team were immediately surrounded by station security and council representatives. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. How many Krellians were dead? Were there any survivors? Had the humans followed proper protocols? Captain Nina Roberts stepped forward, her face still showing that blank expression from before. She spoke clearly and calmly. We conducted a rescue operation in accordance with Article 7 of the Epsilon Accords. 2 hostages recovered alive. 1 hostage body retrieved for proper burial. All hostile forces neutralized. 0 friendly casualties. Mission complete. A Viridian Council member pushed through the crowd. Neutralized? Do you mean killed? Yes, Nina said without emotion. 31 hostile targets eliminated. No prisoners taken. The crowd erupted in shocked conversation. Some aliens looked horrified. Others looked impressed. The Krellian representatives looked furious. The Luminar chairman arrived, his body pulsing with red light. This is unacceptable. You launched a military operation without council approval. You killed dozens of beings without trial or judgment. Nina turned to face him. With respect, Chairman, those beings executed a helpless hostage. They demonstrated they were not interested in peaceful resolution. We protected our people using the minimum force necessary to ensure success. Minimum force? You killed all of them. Yes. That was the minimum force needed to guarantee the safety of the remaining hostages. Any less might have resulted in their deaths. We were not willing to take that risk. The council chairman seemed at a loss for words. The situation was unprecedented. Humans had been part of the council for 30 years, always following protocols, always deferring to council authority. This act of independent military action was shocking. Observer Zixthar stepped forward. Chairman, if I may speak, I accompanied the human team as a neutral observer. I can provide a full report of what occurred. The Luminar's light shifted to blue, a sign of interest. Very well, observer. Present your findings to the council immediately. This entire matter will be investigated thoroughly. Over the next 3 days, the council conducted a formal inquiry. The meeting chamber was packed with representatives from every major species. Security footage from the mining facility was analyzed. The recording showed everything, from the silent infiltration to the final assault on the hostage chamber. Observer Zixthar stood before the council and gave his testimony. He described the humans' transformation after Danny Brooks was executed. He explained how they had changed from diplomatic security officers into something else, something he struggled to name. I witnessed a psychological shift that I cannot adequately explain, Zixthar said. The humans entered what they call hunter mode. All emotion seemed to vanish. They became focused on a single objective with mechanical precision. I have never seen anything like it in any other species. A representative from the insectoid Chixari species spoke up. We have hive soldiers who can focus on objectives without emotion, but they lack the independent thinking these humans displayed. How did they coordinate so perfectly without telepathic communication? Training and trust, Zixthar replied. They have worked together for years. Each member anticipated what the others would do. They moved as one unit despite being separate individuals. A Felkari ambassador, a species known for pack hunting, stood. My people hunt in groups. We understand coordination, but we do so with emotional bonds, with calls and signals that strengthen our connection. These humans showed no such bonding during the operation. How did they maintain unit cohesion? Zixthar looked at his notes. I asked Lieutenant Martinez about this. He said emotions can interfere with effectiveness. The bonding happens before and after missions, not during. During the operation, they rely on training and trust that was built over time. The questions continued for hours. Every species tried to understand what they had witnessed. The cold efficiency, the lack of hesitation, the ability to switch from peaceful diplomacy to lethal combat in minutes. It was beyond their experience. Dr. Peter Grant was called to testify as an expert on human psychology. He stood before the council looking nervous but determined. I will try to explain human psychology in terms other species can understand, though I admit it is difficult. Humans evolved as social primates with complex emotional lives. We form strong bonds with family and community. We have empathy, we feel sadness and joy deeply, but we also evolved as hunters who needed to survive in dangerous environments. These two aspects of our nature usually work together. We care about our groups, which motivates us to protect them. When protection requires violence, we can temporarily suppress our emotions to be more effective. A council member interrupted. But many species protect their groups. What makes humans different? Dr. Grant thought carefully. Most species respond to threats with either hot emotion or cold logic. Humans can do both simultaneously. We care deeply about the people we are protecting, which drives our actions. But we remove emotional interference during execution of the mission. This combination of personal investment and tactical thinking is unusual. But what triggered this response? The Luminar asked. Why did the execution of Danny Brooks cause such a dramatic change? Dr. Grant sighed. That is the part I struggle to explain to non-humans. Humans have internal boundaries, lines that should not be crossed. These boundaries are not laws written down. They are moral instincts that most humans share. The murder of a helpless prisoner is one of the worst violations possible in human psychology. It signals that the perpetrators recognize no limits, no rules of civilized behavior. When that line is crossed, humans respond with absolute determination to eliminate the threat. So it is about morality? Viridian asked. Partly, but it is also practical. If an enemy will murder hostages, negotiation becomes pointless. The only way to protect remaining hostages is direct action. Humans learn this lesson from thousands of years of history. We know that some threats cannot be negotiated with. The Krellian representatives demanded to speak. They stood before the council, their massive forms intimidating. The humans committed mass murder. 31 of our people are dead. We demand justice. We demand the humans be punished for this act of violence. Ambassador Lisa Chen, now recovered enough to attend, rose from the human section. Her face still showed bruises and she moved carefully, but her voice was strong. The Krellians demand justice. Where was justice when your radicals kidnapped 3 diplomats? Where was justice when they beat us? Where was justice when they executed Danny Brooks, a 26-year-old man whose only crime was trying to build peaceful relations between species? The chamber fell silent. Even the Krellian representatives seemed uncertain how to respond. Ambassador Chen continued. You wanted to teach humans a lesson about weakness. You wanted to humiliate us in front of the entire council. Instead, you taught yourselves a different lesson. You learned that humans have limits. You learned that patience should not be mistaken for fear. And you learned that when you murder innocent people, there will be consequences. The Luminar chairman pulsed with different colors, processing all the information. This council faces a difficult decision. On one hand, the humans violated protocols by launching a military operation without approval. On the other hand, they acted to protect their citizens after negotiations demonstrably failed, and a hostage was executed. Multiple species spoke up supporting the humans. The peaceful Paxson said that while they regretted the violence, they understood it was necessary. The crystalline being said that from a logical standpoint, the humans made the only choice that guaranteed hostage survival. Even some of the more militaristic species admitted respect for the operation's effectiveness. But many species remained confused. They could not understand the psychological mechanism that allowed humans to be friendly and peaceful one moment, then cold and lethal the next. They kept asking questions, trying to find an explanation that made sense in their own frameworks of behavior. Observer Zixthar presented his final conclusions. After extensive observation and questioning, I must conclude that the human capacity for what they call hunter mode is unique in the galactic community. Other species have elements of it. Pack hunters have coordination. Hive species have focus. Cold-blooded species have emotional control. But only humans combine all these elements with the ability to activate and deactivate them rapidly. He paused, looking around the chamber. Furthermore, I must note that the trigger for this activation remains somewhat mysterious. We can identify the specific event, the execution of Danny Brooks, but we cannot truly understand why that event crossed a threshold that previous violence did not. The humans speak of moral boundaries and protective instincts, but these concepts do not translate well to species with different evolutionary histories. So you are saying we witnessed something we cannot fully comprehend? A council member asked. 3 months had passed since the rescue operation. Epsilon Prime had returned to its normal rhythm of diplomatic meetings and trade negotiations. But something had changed, something subtle but important in how the different species interacted with humans. Lieutenant Kyle Martinez walked through the station corridors like he always had. He wore the same uniform, carried himself with the same professional bearing, and showed the same courteous respect to everyone he met. To a casual observer, nothing about him had changed, but the aliens watched him differently now. When he passed Krellian officers in the hallway, they stepped aside and nodded respectfully. When he entered rooms, conversations would pause briefly as others acknowledged his presence. The friendly, forgettable security guard had become someone they would never forget. Kyle met observer Zixthar for lunch in one of the station's common dining areas. The reptilian had requested the meeting, saying he had some final questions for his research. They sat at a table near a large window overlooking space. "Thank you for meeting with me, Lieutenant," Zixthar said. "I know you are busy," Kyle smiled. "It is no trouble, observer. What can I help you with?" Zixthar studied him for a moment. "I have been trying to finish my report on the incident, but I keep coming back to the same question. How do you do it? How do you switch between being this friendly, relaxed person and the cold, efficient warrior I saw in that mining facility?" Kyle thought about how to answer. "It is not really a switch, observer. Both aspects are always there. Think of it like a tool. You do not stop being yourself when you use a hammer to build something. You just access a skill you already have. Hunter mode is a skill, learned through training and practice, but it is still me. But you seem so different. No emotion, no hesitation, like a machine." "The emotions were still there," Kyle explained. "I just set them aside temporarily, because they would have interfered with the mission. I was still worried about the hostages. I was still sad about Danny, but expressing those feelings in that moment would not have helped. So I focused on what needed to be done, and now, do you feel those emotions now?" "Yes," Kyle said quietly. "I went to Danny's memorial service. I cried. I talked to his parents and told them how proud they should be of their son. I processed what happened. That is important too. You cannot stay in hunter mode forever. It is a temporary state for specific situations." Zixthar made notes on his datapad. "This is fascinating. Most species I know would need days or weeks to transition between such different mental states. You did it in hours." "That is because we practice," Kyle said. "Human military training includes a lot of psychological preparation. We learn to enter focused states for missions and exit them afterward. We learn to trust our teammates completely. We learn when violence is necessary and when it is not. All of this takes years of practice. But the trigger," Zixthar pressed. "The execution of Danny Brooks. Why did that specific act cause such a dramatic response? I have asked dozens of human experts, and none of them can explain it in a way I truly understand." Kyle leaned back in his chair thinking. "That is because you are looking for a logical explanation, observer. But the trigger is not logical. It is instinctive, emotional, moral, all mixed together. Humans evolved in social groups. We develop strong instincts to protect members of our group. When someone violates the rules of civilized behavior by killing a helpless person, it activates ancient protective mechanisms. But many species have protective instincts." "True. But human protective instincts are connected to our sense of morality and justice. We do not just protect our group from external threats. We also punish those who break fundamental rules. The Krellians did not just threaten us, they demonstrated they had no moral boundaries. That made them irredeemable in our eyes. Negotiation was pointless. Only elimination would guarantee safety." Zixthar shook his head slowly. "I understand the words you are saying. But I do not feel what you feel. I cannot truly comprehend why that specific act crossed a line that previous violence did not. Kyle nodded. And that is okay, observer. Some things about human psychology will always be alien to non-humans, just as some aspects of your psychology are alien to me. We can describe it, document it, analyze it, but full understanding might not be possible across species barriers. They finished their lunch in companionable silence. As they were leaving, Zixthar asked one more question. Lieutenant, if a similar situation happened again, would you respond the same way? Kyle did not hesitate. Yes. If someone harms innocent people under my protection, I will do whatever is necessary to stop them. That will never change. It is who humans are. Zixthar left to finish his report. Kyle returned to his duties, checking security protocols and coordinating with the diplomatic team. Later that day, Captain Nina Roberts called a meeting with the human security team. They gathered in their quarters, the same team that had conducted the rescue operation. Everyone was there. Kate Morrison, Greg Sullivan, Tom Baker, Rachel Sanders, Jack Chen, Maria Lopez, and Sarah Quinn. Nina stood before them, looking more relaxed than she had in months. I wanted to update you all on the diplomatic fallout from our operation. The good news is that most species in the Council support what we did. They understand we had no choice. The Krellian Empire has formally apologized and paid reparations to Danny's family. What is the bad news? Kate asked. The bad news is that we are now famous. Every military force in the galaxy wants to study what we did. We are getting requests for training seminars, tactical demonstrations, and psychological evaluations. Apparently, hunter mode is the new hot topic in alien military academies. The team groaned collectively. They were soldiers, not teachers. They did their job because it was necessary, not because they wanted recognition. I know, Nina said, but look at it this way. We have given humanity a reputation. Other species now know we are not to be trifled with. That might prevent future incidents. The Krellians certainly learned their lesson. They are being extremely careful around all human diplomats now. Kyle spoke up. Captain, do you think the aliens will ever understand what triggered our response, or will it always remain a mystery to them? Nina considered the question. I think they understand the surface. They know we reacted strongly to the execution. They know we have boundaries that should not be crossed. But the deep psychological reason, the moral and emotional framework that makes that act unforgivable in human eyes, that might always be beyond their comprehension. They did not evolve the same way we did. They do not have the same instincts. Greg Sullivan raised his hand. Is that a problem? Should we try harder to explain it to them? Nina shook her head. No. Sometimes it is better to be a little mysterious. Let them wonder. Let them be uncertain about exactly where our boundaries are. That uncertainty will make them more careful, more respectful. As long as they know we have boundaries and that crossing them has serious consequences, we have achieved our goal. The meeting ended. The team dispersed to their various duties. Life on Epsilon Prime continued. A week later, Ambassador Lisa Chen gave a speech to the full council assembly. She stood at the podium, her injuries healed but the memory of them still fresh. She spoke about the importance of diplomatic relations, of building bridges between species, of working together for the common good. But then she addressed the incident directly. Some of you have asked me about what happened 3 months ago. You want to understand how humans could be so peaceful and then so violent. You want to know what triggered the response from our security team. The truth is simple, even if the psychology behind it is complex. Humans believe in rules, not just laws that are written down, but moral rules that govern how civilized beings should behave. One of the most fundamental rules is that you do not murder helpless prisoners. When the Krellians broke that rule, they showed they did not recognize any moral boundaries. At that point, our security team had a clear choice. Continue trying to negotiate with beings who had demonstrated they could not be reasoned with, or act to protect the remaining hostages. They chose action, and I am alive because of that choice. She paused, looking around the chamber. I know many of you still do not understand why that particular act was so significant, why it crossed a threshold that previous violence did not. That is okay. You do not need to understand human psychology completely to work with us. You just need to know that we have boundaries, and that those boundaries should be respected. Humans are committed to peace. We genuinely want to build positive relationships with all species in this council. We will negotiate, compromise, and work patiently toward solutions. But we will not tolerate the murder of innocents. We will not accept cruelty to those who are helpless, and we will protect our own with every capability we possess. The chamber was silent when she finished. Then slowly, representatives from multiple species began to stand. It started with the peaceful Paxan, then spread to the Viridians, the Chixari, the Felkari. Even some of the more militaristic species rose from their seats. It was a sign of respect, acknowledgement of the truth in her words. The Krellian delegation remained seated, but they too nodded in acknowledgement. They had learned their lesson. That evening, Kyle stood at one of the observation windows looking out.